Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in moves to shake up his cabinet, nominating 8 minister-level officials and a new ambassador to the United States. The new U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper is in Seoul. He and his South Korean counterpart reaffirmed their country's ironclad alliance. Esper saying the U.S. remains committed to dialogue with North Korea for its denuclearization. And Samsung Electronics won the biggest share of the global market for DRAM chips in the first half of this year, despite the trade tensions in Asia and weak demand. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. President Moon has carried out a major reshuffle in his cabinet, making major ministerial-level changes in around 10 areas. The Moon government is trying to get its policies moving as it enters its third year. Park Hee-jun reports.
President Moon Jae-in has revealed his nominees for some major spots in what will be his new-look cabinet for his second phase in office.
President Moon Jae-in has nominated 8 ministerial-level officials and South Korea's ambassador to the United States. This reshuffle centers on constantly and stably pushing the administration's reform policies forward.
The president named his former chief of staff for civil affairs, Cho Guk, to serve as the new Minister of Justice. The Blue House says that with his knowledge and experience in law and the presidential office, Cho will help push ahead reforms of the prosecution and establish a fair and just legal system. The new chairperson of the Fair Trade Commission will be Jo Sung-wook, a business professor at Seoul National University. She's the first female nominee in the commission's 38-year history. Lee Soo-hyuk will take over as the new ambassador to Washington, replacing Ambassador Cho Yoon-jae. The lawmaker previously worked at Korea's intelligence agency and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Moon Jung-in, special advisor to President Moon for Foreign Affairs and National Security, was also offered the position, but he turned it down. The Blue House says that as an expert in diplomacy, he will contribute to furthering South Korea-U.S. relations and will help resolve various ongoing diplomatic issues. Also advising President Moon on diplomatic and security affairs will be former Unification Minister Chung Se-hyun. He was selected to head up the Presidential Advisory Panel on unification issues for his decades-long experience on North Korea and international affairs. This is the administration's first major shuffle since March. It essentially completes the cabinet for President Moon's second phase in office. With the new cabinet members, the Moon administration plans to concentrate on achieving results that can be felt by the people, especially in regards to creating an inclusive nation. The nominees will undergo parliamentary hearings before taking up their new roles. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper is in South Korea as part of a 5-nation trip to the Asia-Pacific region. And he met this morning with his South Korean counterpart, Chung Kyung-do. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Visiting U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper reaffirmed that the South Korea-U.S. alliance is ironclad and serves as a linchpin of peace and security both on the Korean peninsula and in Northeast Asia. He said that the two countries share the same vision of a peaceful Korean peninsula as well as a free, open Indo-Pacific region. Esper added Washington is willing to engage diplomatically with Pyongyang to make progress on all the commitments made in the Singapore joint statement to achieve the denuclearization of North Korea. But he added that United Nations sanctions will be strictly enforced until North Korea participates with U.S. allies in achieving the complete, verifiable, irreversible path of denuclearization. Esper also wanted to acknowledge the progress made towards the conditions-based transition of the wartime operational control of the Combined Forces Command from a U.S. commander to a South Korean commander. He said this shows the strength and trust between the allies that no adversaries can match. The two countries kicked off a preliminary session on Monday in the run-up to their summertime command post combined exercise meant to test South Korea's initial operational capability for the envisioned OPCON transfer. Meanwhile, Chung said Esper's visit is meaningful regarding the security situation South Korea currently faces, citing the entry of Chinese and Russian aircrafts into Korea's air defense identification zone. as well as a Russian aircraft trespassing into South Korean airspace. Chung also said that the series of firings of short-range ballistic missiles by North Korea are not helping easing military tensions on the peninsula, and added Tokyo's economic retaliatory measures are hurting the three-way security alliance of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The U.S. State Department says America wants all of its allies to contribute more to shared defense, and that means South Korea is no exception. Spokesperson Morgan Ortega said Thursday that one of President Trump's campaign pledges had been to get the burden shared more fairly, and that he's been crystal clear that the allies have to pay more. Trump tweeted Wednesday that Seoul and Washington have started negotiations on their defense cost-sharing deal, and that South Korea had agreed to pay a lot more. However, the South Korean government denied that any official talks on the matter have started. North Korea's state media says the regime's rubber-stamp parliament will be meeting later this month for a second time in a single year, which observers say is rare. The most recent meeting was back in April. In that meeting, the Supreme People's Assembly re-elected Kim Jong-un as the regime's leader and representative, replaced the cabinet, and revised the constitution. The meeting this month could be meant to deal with North Korea's 5-year economic plan due next year and its foreign policy goals, including its denuclearization talks with the U.S. South Korean golfer Ko Jin-young, who's climbed to the top of the world rankings with 2 big wins this year, is playing here in Korea at the 2019 Jeju Masters. It's the first tournament in this year's KLPGA Tour, and Ko will be looking for her 10th Korean Tour win. Our Hong Yu reports.
The current world #1 female golfer is South Korea's Ko Jin-young. After a year playing in major tournaments around the world, she is back where she picked up a golf club for the very first time. Ko had the chance to meet with young athletes that dream of becoming a golfer just like her. She said looking at them reminds her of the days she used to practice on that same driving range as a little girl. Just 2 years after her LPGA debut, Ko Jin-young is at the top of the official money list, the scoring average, the Rolex Player of the Year list, and more. This time, she will play for her 10th victory in the Korea Ladies Professional Golf Association Tour at the Jeju Samdasu Masters. Another Korean golf sensation, 19-time LPGA Tour event winner Park In-bi, says that she is proud of Ko's success and that these are Ko's glory days. She added that Ko's shots are very precise and her play overall is perfect. As well as Park In-bi and Ko Jin-young, other top Korean golfers like Choi Hae-jin and Cho Jung-min are also competing at the Jeju Samdasu Masters tournament, which begins today. The tournament, which is the first on this year's KLPGA circuit, ends on Sunday. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics took the biggest share of the global DRAM market in the second quarter, despite sluggish demand overall. According to global market researcher DRAM Exchange, Samsung posted almost $6.8 billion in sales, taking around 46% of the market. Its share actually went up 3 percentage points, despite a 2.7% decline in sales compared to the quarter before. Overall, global DRAM market revenue fell by more than 9% on quarter. The American company Micron Technology, meanwhile, saw its revenue drop by a fifth, mainly due to the U.S.-China trade war, raising Samsung's market share. Japan's current account surplus shrank in the first half of 2019 compared to a year earlier due to sluggish exports to Asian countries because of the trade tensions in the region. According to a report from Japan's finance ministry, the current account surplus from January to June was down 4% from the previous year to a little under $99 billion. Japan's trade surplus in goods dropped sharply due to a fall in shipments of semiconductor manufacturing equipment and auto parts to South Korea and China. Japan's exports fell by 5% and imports fell by 1%. It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Dr. Kim, thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure.
So when Japan announced the details this week of how it's going to regulate exports to Korea from now on, it did not add any more products to the most strict category, like the 3 semiconductor products it already announced. And it's approved the first shipment of photoresists. So in view of that fact, is Japan backing off of this trade war a little? What's their strategy?
I think there are mixed interpretations on Tokyo's first approval of high-tech materials export to Korea since the beginning of export curve in July. On one side, it looks that Abe administration is sending a message of conversation with President Moon's government. But on the other side, Abe administration is just checking global current opinion on this issue. I believe the latter is more reasonable interpretation as of now.
Interesting. So maybe more sensitive to international opinion there.
Right.
Now, one of the ways the Korean government's responded to Japan's actions is to announce a huge increase in investment in R&D for products like semiconductors it has placed so that Korea doesn't get stuck like this again. How effective will this be in the short and long term, and what do you think needs to be done?
Increasing R&D is, of course, the most appropriate solution against Japan's key material export curves. But the problem is it takes such a long time, at least 2 to 3 years, to develop the substitute materials and components through R&D. I think for short-run solutions, Korean corporations and government should be more focused on searching substitute materials and components from other countries, of course, except Japan, more aggressively, like through merging corporations that have the technology on these materials and components.
Got it. Well, shifting gears here a little bit, President Trump, as he long said he would, this week labeled China a currency manipulator. What led him to this decision, and what's he trying to do?
Actually, Mr. Trump's administration has been pretty cautious on designating China as a currency manipulator so far. For avoiding the expansion of the trade war with China. This time, the reason for designating China as a currency manipulator is, I believe, for having stronger leverage over U.S.-China trade negotiations, which got stuck from last 2 weeks Shanghai meeting.
Yeah, and that decision has had consequences for the exchange rate as the Chinese yuan crossed the psychological barrier of 7 yuan to the dollar for the first time since the financial crisis. What's the significance of this 7 yuan threshold?
From the beginning of trade war with Washington, Beijing has been trying very hard to avoid being designated as currency manipulator. And the 7 yuan per dollar exchange rate was a psychological barrier, which was strongly kept by Chinese government. So the exceeding 7 yuan per dollar exchange rate indicates Beijing has decided to let yuan depreciate. So in other words, China signals it may continue to weaken its currency. So that even a more escalating trade war tension between the two countries.
Yeah, the dollar seems to be strengthening across the board. It certainly has against the Korean won. But if America and China are now in a currency war, surely that is going to have a big effect on Korea. What effect will it have, and what can be done about it?
Since Korean economy for independence, which is over 17% of total GDP, is one of the largest in the world. I think the largest victim of U.S.-China trade war and currency war would be Korea. So in the short run, the impact of U.S.-China currency war is reflected in Korean stock market. So it is important to stabilize the stock market through decreasing speculative short-term transactions. I believe one of the measures for this is banning short sales, which is considered by Korean Supervisory Office.
Yeah, we did see measures announced this week in that direction. All right, Dr. Kim,
Right.
that's where we'll have to stop for today. Thank you for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, we know that the U.S. has been trying to mediate between Seoul and Tokyo in their latest dispute, and whatever efforts were made in that direction were less than totally effective, though, seeing as Japan went ahead and took South Korea off its list of trusted trading partners. So the question is, will the U.S. keep trying to help its allies work things out? Our EG1 has this report.
The US expressed concerns over the ongoing dispute between South Korea and Japan, stressing that the two sides need to talk in order to solve the problem, while offering to play a role to help resolve the issue.
After the trilateral foreign ministers meeting with her US and Japanese counterparts in Thailand earlier this month, Minister Kang made it known that Washington is willing to mediate between the two sides. However, experts doubt that there's much Washington can do or would actively try to do.
The Obama administration tried to use trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo to pressure Beijing. But President Trump is different. He directly pressures China through bilateral issues like the trade war. Thus, Trump doesn't see that maintaining good trilateral ties has a direct benefit for the US, and thus will not play an active role between America's two Asian allies.
It'll be hard for Trump himself to play an active role in the dispute because they are doing the same to China, citing security issues to impose trade restrictions. Plus, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe hasn't asked the US for help.
The US, before Japan took South Korea off its whitelist of trading partners, had proposed a standstill agreement to prevent the conflict from growing and to allow talks to happen. But Japan rejected the proposal, causing the US to lose face and giving it another reason not to intervene, according to Professor Kim. Still, the experts think that there could be a lower level of mediation from the U.S., including from officials more interested in foreign affairs, to prevent the collapse of the trilateral cooperation.
South Korea's possible termination of the Seoul-Tokyo Military Information Sharing Pact could shift the traditional relationship the US has had with its allies. That would mean the decoupling of the Seoul-Washington and Washington-Tokyo alliances, which would limit US pressure on China.
Kim, however, also warned that South Korea should not play this card further because it could portray a threatening or negative image to the U.S. Professor Hosaka added, amid the risk to the global supply chain and concerns among U.S. technology-related industries, there will be some sort of a mediation from Washington. However, he added that it's more important for Seoul to appeal to the international community than to simply win Washington's support in pressuring Tokyo. 이지원, Arirang News.
Now, thousands of demonstrators have been staging rallies here in South Korea over the past few weeks, slamming Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for his trade measures. Now it looks like a smaller yet determined wave of discontent is rising in Japan as well. Won Jung-hwan has more.
A group of Japanese protesters gathered near the Prime Minister's office on Thursday, urging Shinzo Abe to immediately stop Japan's export curbs on South Korea. They waved banners reading "No Abe" and a photo of a statue representing the victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery, which was recently ordered by Japanese officials to be removed from a global art festivals taking place in the country.
We are furious about what the Abe administration is doing right now.
Protesters says the tightened exports of key materials to South Korea and Seoul's recent removal from a whitelist of trusted export destinations was a move by Abe to retaliate over compensation for Japan's wartime forced labor of Koreans.
The move seems to be retaliation against South Korea's ruling on wartime forced labor.
They also voiced concern that the export curbs against South Korea will only create economic instability in both countries, eventually coming back to bite Japan.
Both South Korea and Japan will be hurt. This is not good for Japan or for companies here.
Some said the retaliation against South Korea could be driven by fear what Abe saw in its neighbor, with the current South Korean administration achieving democratic reform through what's famously known as the Candlelight Revolution, which unseated South Korea's former corrupt president. Thursday's anti-Abe protest wasn't the first in Japan. A few days ago, roughly 200 demonstrators gathered near Tokyo's crowded Shinjuku station to condemn the export restrictions and to support the anti-Abe protests held in Seoul. As relations between Seoul and Tokyo continue to deteriorate due to Abe's retaliation against South Korea, it has fueled anti-Abe sentiment in Japan among those unhappy with the Prime Minister's treatment of South Korea. 원정환, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Japanese civic groups are urging Japan to put back on display at Japan's biggest international art festival a statue representing the victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery. Japan's Association of Art Critics said the statue's removal on government orders violates freedom of expression, and art, they said, should not be repressed by violence and threats. The Consumers Union of Japan also criticized the statue's removal, saying the decision violates the rights of citizens and consumers. Now, one card China has not yet played in its trade war with America is its dominance in the market for elements used in specialized high-tech industries, elements known as rare earths. Well, now a rare earth industry group in China said it supports the Chinese government in its struggle with the U.S., possibly a sign rare earths will become an issue. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The Association of China Rare Earth Industry issued a statement this week after a special working meeting to discuss the guidance it was given by Chinese President Xi Jinping during his visit to a rare earth plant in May. Calling the U.S. trade measures on China a form of bullying, the association vowed to support Chinese countermeasures in the escalating trade war. Observers say China could use its dominance in the production of rare earths, a group of 17 chemical elements used in consumer electronics and military equipment, as powerful leverage in its trade war with the U.S. Last week, as President Trump announced he would impose further tariffs on another $300 billion of Chinese goods from September 1st, Trump again avoided China's rare earths as one of the goods subject to tariffs. Beijing has yet to place any restrictions on its rare earth supplies to the U.S. While the Chinese Rare Earth Association rarely comments on the trade war and made no mention of export restrictions during their meeting, it said all attendees agreed U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods were aimed at suppressing China's development. Meanwhile, Huawei, which has found itself one of the biggest issues in the trade war due to the U.S. sanctions it's now subject to, has declared its intention to spur talent recruitment for technology independence. The Chinese tech giant is offering what it's calling 5 times your normal wage and a world-class working environment, as Huawei's new talent recruitment plan reflects its determination to stand up against Washington's sanctions. In May, the U.S. Commerce Department placed Huawei on a de facto blacklist over national security concerns. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news, the city of Seoul has opened 5 newly planted forests along the Han River. The Seoul Metropolitan Government says these nature forests will give visitors an eco-friendly way to take shelter from the heat and will serve as a buffer from the fine dust pollution and traffic. The Hangang River Forest Development Project started around 4 years ago, and since then, the city planted nearly 12,000 trees, including bamboo and pine trees, near Nanji, Banpo, and the Icheon Riverside Parks. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.